My name is Madison Clark, and on the day of my grandfather's will reading in Charleston, my life shattered, and then exploded into something I could never have imagined. Picture this. My entire family gathered inside our ancestral mansion, the chandeliers glowing, the mahogany table polished to perfection, everyone dressed in black but hungry for gold. My sister Charlotte, the golden child, sat tall and smug, already expecting to be crowned the heir to our family empire. Me. I was the disappointment, the dreamer with ink-stained hands, the one everyone believed would leave empty-handed. When the lawyer opened the envelope, my worst fears came true. Charlotte was granted $15 million. My parents clapped, proud, their eyes shining with triumph. And then he turned to me. To my granddaughter Madison Clark. His words sliced through the room. I leave only a letter. The silence was deafening. I felt my family's eyes burning into me, some amused, others relieved, all of them convinced I was finished. My mother leaned forward with that familiar, cold smile and whispered, "This is what you deserve, Madison." But here's the part they didn't know. That letter, the one they mocked, wasn't the end. It was the beginning. My grandfather had hidden a secret so powerful, so carefully planned, that it would not only rewrite his legacy, it would destroy theirs. And in that moment, as humiliation turned to rage, I realized the black sheep was about to become the true heir. So stay with me, because what happened behind those mansion doors is a story you will never forget. Charleston has always been a city of contrasts. Magnolia blossoms and iron gates hiding secrets behind painted shutters. And nowhere was that truer than inside the Clark mansion. Our home wasn't just a house. It was a symbol, for stories of white columns and sweeping verandas that overlooked the Ashley River. Guests whispered about its beauty, about the family that seemed untouchable. But to me, those walls felt like a museum where I didn't belong. Every portrait on the wall another reminder of the perfect Clark legacy I could never live up to. At the head of that legacy stood my parents. Richard Clark, sharp suit, sharper tongue. He had spent decades as one of Charleston's most feared attorneys, known for never losing a case. My mother, Margaret, was just as ruthless, a woman who could turn a cocktail party into a business negotiation before the appetizers were cleared. Together they were a power couple, the kind that lived for appearances and despised weakness. And then there was Charlotte, my sister. My parents' pride, their masterpiece. Harvard undergrad, Wharton MBA, already running divisions of the Clark empire before she turned 30. Even her marriage had been calculated, a union with Jonathan Hayes, the son of a real estate dynasty. To my parents, Charlotte was proof the Clark name would live forever at the top. Me. I was the shadow in every family portrait. While Charlotte mastered market trends, I filled notebooks with stories no one wanted to read. While she made million-dollar deals, I scraped by teaching creative writing at a community college and chasing a novel that refused to sell. At family dinners, the script never changed. My mother would beam at Charlotte. "Your presentation in New York was flawless, darling. Investors adored you." My father would raise his glass. "This family owes its future to Charlotte." Then their eyes would land on me, sometimes pitying, more often cold. "Still writing your little stories, Madison?" Each word carved deeper into me, but I stayed quiet, letting their contempt sink into my bones. Because silence was safer than admitting the truth. That every time Charlotte smiled at me across the table, I could see the triumph in her eyes. She wasn't just my sister. She was my rival. And neither of us knew then just how far our rivalry was about to go. The morning of my grandfather's funeral broke gray and heavy, as if Charleston itself had slipped into mourning. Rain streaked down the iron gates of St. Michael's Church, washing the cobblestones until they glistened like glass. Guests arrived in black town cars, umbrellas snapping against the wind, each face marked with polite sorrow, more performance than grief. Inside, the pews filled with Charleston's elite. Judges, bankers, politicians, all there to pay tribute to Thomas Clark, the man who had built an empire from nothing. They spoke of his victories, his wealth, his place in history. But as I sat in the front row, my hands twisting the damp hem of my dress, I felt a hollow ache. No one mentioned the part of him I knew best. The man who sneaked me books of poetry when my parents told me to study law. The man who leaned close during Sunday dinners and whispered, "Keep writing, Maddie. Someday they'll see." My parents stood stiff beside Charlotte, their grief hidden beneath perfect posture. Charlotte dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief, just enough to look tragic in front of the cameras. I wanted to cry openly, but I'd learned in this family that real emotion was weakness. After the service, we walked through the cemetery, the rain soaking into the earth as the casket was lowered. My heart cracked with the sound of each shovelful of dirt hitting the lid. When the last words were spoken and people drifted toward their cars, I lingered by the grave, unwilling to leave. That's when Gerald Simmons, my grandfather's oldest friend, placed a trembling hand on my shoulder. His eyes, red-rimmed but steady, searched mine. He spoke of you often, Madison. He worried about the way this family treated you. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. He was the only one who believed in me. Gerald nodded slowly, his voice low, almost conspiratorial. Before he passed, he told me something. Said he wanted me to repeat it, word for word. Gerald leaned closer, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. Tell Maddie I've been watching. Tell her I'll make it right. For a moment the world tilted. My pulse roared in my ears, drowning out the storm. Make it right. What did that mean? But before I could ask more, my mother's voice cut sharp through the drizzle. Madison, come along. We have dinner to prepare before the will reading. I glanced back at Gerald, but he only squeezed my hand, eyes heavy with a secret he wasn't yet ready to share. And as I walked away from my grandfather's grave, a strange certainty settled into my chest. The real storm hadn't even begun. The next morning, the Clark mansion looked more like a courtroom than a home. Heavy curtains drawn against the Charleston sun, silver trays of untouched coffee cooling on the sideboard, and in the center of the study, a long mahogany table polished until it gleamed like glass. My parents sat at the head, Richard and Margaret Clark, their posture stiff, their eyes sharp. Beside them, Charlotte and her husband Jonathan looked like royalty waiting to be crowned. Every detail screamed control, wealth, and power. Me. I was pushed to the far end of the table, as though even my chair was a reminder of how little I mattered here. Mr. Carter, my grandfather's attorney, cleared his throat. His voice was steady, but the tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. As executor of Thomas Clark's estate, I am here to honor his final wishes. He adjusted his glasses and began. First came the donations. Millions to local charities, endowments for hospitals, gifts to lifelong staff. My parents nodded approvingly, Charlotte smiled politely, and I sat silently, waiting for the moment that would decide everything. And then it came. To my granddaughter, Charlotte Clark Hayes, I leave the sum of $15 million, to be used at her discretion for the preservation and growth of Clark Enterprises. Charlotte's smile bloomed like a rose in full sunlight. My mother clapped her hands softly. My father leaned across the table, squeezing Charlotte's hand with pride. Well deserved, he whispered loud enough for me to hear. Mr. Carter shuffled his papers, then looked directly at me. My chest tightened. This was it. This was the moment my grandfather's belief in me would finally be recognized. To my granddaughter, Madison Clark. His pause felt like an eternity. I leave this letter. The room went still. A letter. Charlotte's laugh was quick, sharp, almost musical in its cruelty. My mother tilted her head, lips curved in that cold, practiced smile. A letter, Madison. Perhaps some words of wisdom. It seems even your grandfather knew stories were all you were ever good for. Heat burned in my cheeks. My throat closed. Around me, the family's eyes glittered with amusement, relief, triumph. They had won. I forced myself not to cry, not to give them the satisfaction. But inside, humiliation pressed down like a weight I could barely carry. Charlotte leaned closer, her voice sugar-sweet but dripping with venom. Don't take it too hard, little sister. Some of us are simply destined for greatness, and some of us aren't. The lawyer cleared his throat again, trying to steady the room. This concludes the public portion of the will reading. But the words barely registered. All I could hear was the echo in my head. 15 million for Charlotte, and nothing for me but a piece of paper. And yet, as I sat there, fists clenched beneath the table, something Gerald's words from the funeral came rushing back. I'll make it right. I didn't know how. I didn't know when. But somehow I knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. When the rest of my family swept out of the study, their designer heels clicking against the marble floor like victory drums, I stayed frozen in my chair. My hands were clenched so tightly my nails dug crescents into my palms. Mr. Carter, still seated behind my grandfather's massive desk, waited until the door closed and the echo of my mother's voice faded down the hall. Then his tone softened, the stiffness of formality slipping just slightly. "Miss Clark," he said quietly, "please remain. Your grandfather left instructions for a private portion of his will. It was meant for your eyes only." My head snapped up. "Private portion?" He nodded, producing a second envelope from a locked drawer. The paper was heavy, cream-colored, sealed with my grandfather's initials pressed in deep crimson wax. My name, Madison, was written across the front in his unmistakable, steady hand. I reached for it with trembling fingers. For a moment I just stared, afraid to break the seal, afraid this too might be a cruel trick. Finally I tore it open. Inside were several handwritten pages, his script looping and deliberate. "My dearest Maddie," it began. "If you're reading this, I am gone. But know that I saw you, truly saw you when others did not. I watched your resilience, your passion, your refusal to bend even when the world dismissed you. And I promised you once I would make it right." Tears blurred my vision, but I kept reading. "Over the last 20 years, I have built something apart from the Clark fortune. Quietly, carefully, without your father's knowledge. A collection of literature, art, and property valued at over $30 million. All of it now belongs to you. The cornerstone is a historic 3-story building in downtown Charleston. The ground floor is a gallery and publishing house. The second and third floors, your home and your studio. It is already prepared. It is yours." My breath caught in my throat. The building, fortune. Mr. Carter slid a thick portfolio across the desk. "Your grandfather instructed me to show you this once you'd read his letter." Inside were photographs of the property. Brick walls, tall arched windows, a sign already engraved with its future name, the Clark House of Letters. Deeds, bank documents, even a trust that provided living expenses and startup funding. I lifted my gaze to Mr. Carter, my voice barely a whisper. "Is this real?" He gave me a single solemn nod. "It is very real, Miss Clark. Your grandfather spent years ensuring that this inheritance could never be touched, never be contested, and never be controlled by your parents. It belongs to you and you alone." For a moment, the humiliation from earlier, the laughter, the whispers, the smug looks, faded into nothing. In its place rose something I hadn't felt in years. Power. They thought I'd been given nothing. But in truth, I'd been given everything. The study door burst open before I had even finished tucking the letter back into its envelope. My father's voice boomed first, sharp and furious. "This has gone on long enough." My mother stormed in behind him, face pale with rage, lips pressed into a thin, trembling line. Charlotte and Jonathan followed, Charlotte's heels striking the hardwood like war drums, her smile already curling with victory. Even Gerald, my grandfather's oldest friend, hovered uncertainly in the doorway, eyes darting between us. I froze, the letter still clutched in my hand. Richard Clark's gaze dropped to the papers on Mr. Carter's desk. "What is this?" he demanded. "What have you been hiding?" Mr. Carter didn't flinch. He rose to his feet, voice calm but commanding. "With respect, Mr. Clark, your father's will contained a private portion, intended for Madison alone. It is both legal and binding." My mother's voice sliced in, high-pitched and shaking. "Private portion? There are no private portions in family matters. We are her parents. We have the right to know everything." Carter's jaw tightened. "You have no such right." Thomas Clark's instructions were explicit. This was his wish. Charlotte crossed her arms, eyes glinting. "So what is it then? Jewelry? A little stipend? Some old poetry books?" She leaned forward, her tone mocking. "Tell us, Maddie. What did Grandpa leave you? Sentimental scraps?" My hands trembled, but I didn't speak. Carter answered for me, his words precise and deliberate. Thomas Clark left Madison a separate estate. A literary collection, a trust, and full ownership of a historic building in downtown Charleston, valued at over $30 million. The silence that followed was deafening. Then the room exploded. "Impossible!" my father roared, slamming his fist on the desk so hard the crystal lamp rattled. "This is theft," my mother screeched, pointing a manicured finger at me. "You manipulated a dying old man." Charlotte's face drained of color, her lips quivering before she spat. You're the failure. The dreamer. He couldn't choose you over me." For the first time I stood. My knees shook but my voice didn't. He did choose me. Their heads snapped toward me. I could feel the heat of their fury, the disbelief, the betrayal twisting their features. But I clutched the letter to my chest, my grandfather's handwriting pressed against my heartbeat, and I held my ground. This wasn't your empire to inherit, I said, my voice steady. This was his legacy. And he wanted it to live through me. Charlotte laughed bitterly, but it cracked, sharp and broken. Enjoy it while it lasts. You won't keep it. We'll contest. We'll bury you in court. Before I could answer, Carter cut in firmly, sliding a folder across the desk. You'll find video recordings, dated over the last 5 years, of Mr. Clark detailing these exact wishes, coherent, clear, and undeniable. I assure you there is nothing to contest. The color drained completely from my father's face. My mother gasped, actually stumbling back against the wall. And Charlotte, she just stared at me, eyes brimming with fury and something else. Fear. I realized then, in that thick, breathless silence, for the first time in my life I had the power. And I wasn't about to give it back. The silence in the study shattered like glass. My father's face flushed crimson, veins straining at his temples. He jabbed a finger at Mr. Carter. You'll regret this. I will drag this through every court in South Carolina. My father was manipulated and I will prove it. My mother's voice rose higher, brittle and wild. 30 million to her? To the daughter who squandered every opportunity we gave her? No, this will not stand. This is our legacy, ours and Charlotte's. Charlotte's chair scraped back violently. She stood trembling, eyes darting between me and the papers Carter had displayed. The perfect composure she'd always worn like armor was cracking before my eyes. He promised me, she whispered, voice breaking. Grandpa told me I would carry the Clark name. He promised me. Her hands balled into fists, nails digging into her palms. When her eyes finally locked on mine, they burned with fury. You stole this, Maddie. You manipulated him with your sob stories, your failures. You don't deserve a dime. The words hit me like knives, but for once they didn't cut as deep. I lifted the letter, the pages trembling slightly in my grasp. I didn't steal anything, Charlotte. He left this for me. Because he believed in me when none of you did. Jonathan, her husband, stepped forward, his voice low but edged with caution. Charlotte, with video evidence, years of documentation, contesting will be nearly impossible. You could bankrupt the company trying to fight this. My father spun on him, his fury lashing out. Whose side are you on, Jonathan? Jonathan's silence said everything. My mother let out a strangled cry, half grief, half rage, before grabbing my father's arm. Richard will fight. We'll bury her. She'll wish she never opened that letter. They stormed out, leaving the air vibrating with their threats. Charlotte lingered, eyes wet, pride shattering piece by piece. She shook her head, voice almost a sob. It should have been me. Then she turned sharply and fled, Jonathan trailing after her. Suddenly the room was quiet again. Only Gerald remained, his weathered face solemn. He looked at me as though he were seeing me for the very first time. Your grandfather knew this would tear them apart. He also knew you'd have the strength to endure it. I sank back into my chair, the letter still clutched to my chest. For the first time, the weight of what had just happened pressed down on me. This wasn't just an inheritance. It was a responsibility, a legacy, and a battlefield. $30 million. A building with my name on it. An entire family now turned against me. And as the rain beat harder against the mansion windows, I realized something chilling. My grandfather hadn't just given me wealth. He had given me a war. The next afternoon, I stood in front of the building my grandfather had left me. Downtown Charleston buzzed with its usual rhythm. Carriages clattering across cobblestones, tourists wandering with pralines in hand, shop signs swaying in the breeze. But here, on a quiet corner of King Street, rose my inheritance. A 3-story brick structure with tall arched windows, ivy creeping up its sides, and a carved stone plaque dated 1892. Carter unlocked the heavy front doors, their iron handles cool against my palm. The scent hit me first, aged wood, dust, and the faint trace of fresh paint. We stepped into a vast open space with exposed beams and gleaming floors. Sunlight spilled through the windows, falling across empty walls like a spotlight waiting for a performance. This, Carter said, gesturing with a sweep of his hand, is your gallery. The Clark House of Letters. Your grandfather renovated it quietly 5 years ago. It's ready for you to make your mark. I turned slowly, my heels echoing in the emptiness. Gallery. Publishing house. This wasn't just a gift. It was a command. Upstairs, the apartment was warm and inviting. High ceilings, built-in bookshelves, a studio space larger than my entire Brooklyn apartment. On the kitchen counter sat a folder Carter had placed earlier. Inside, deeds, financial records, trust agreements. I skimmed the numbers and my stomach flipped. $30 million in assets. $10,000 a month in living expenses. $200,000 in startup funding. It didn't feel real. I dropped onto the couch, clutching the folder to my chest. I'm a teacher. A writer who can't sell a book. How am I supposed to run all this? My voice cracked in the empty room. Carter's tone was gentle but steady. Your grandfather believed you could. He prepared this not as a burden but as an opportunity. He wanted you to stand on your own terms. I wanted to believe him. But beneath the all was fear, heavy and suffocating. My parents were already sharpening their knives, ready to contest, to drag me through the courts. Charlotte's words still echoed in my ears. You don't deserve a dime. And now here I was, standing in a palace of possibility, yet feeling like an imposter in my own story. As the sun dipped low, the windows glowing gold, I whispered into the silence. Grandpa, what if they're right? What if I'm not strong enough for this? The only answer was the creak of the old beams, the hush of Charleston's evening settling in. But deep inside, something stirred. A flicker, fragile but alive. Maybe I didn't have to be ready right now. Maybe I just had to begin. The next weeks blurred into a whirlwind of decisions I never thought I'd face. Contractors walked me through the gallery space, their voices bouncing off the high brick walls. Lighting tracks here, adjustable spotlights along this beam. You'll need climate control if you want to display rare books. I nodded, jotting notes, my heart pounding. Each signature I scrawled on a document felt surreal. Leases, permits, insurance policies. It wasn't just a building anymore. It was becoming mine. Still, the weight pressed hard. At night in the upstairs apartment, I would sit surrounded by stacks of papers. Financial statements, renovation quotes, curatorial plans. My father's voice haunted me. You don't belong in the real world, Madison. Stories don't pay bills. And yet, every morning, I woke to sunlight pouring through those arched windows, and the doubt loosened its grip just a little. Then came Julia Whitmore. She was a striking woman in her 60s, silver hair swept into a bun, her presence commanding without a word. Carter had arranged our meeting, explaining she was an old friend of my grandfather's, and a respected gallery owner. He asked me years ago to guide you when the time came, Julia said, her voice smooth as aged bourbon. Thomas believed in your vision. My job is to make sure you can carry it forward. For the first time I felt less alone. We toured the gallery together, Julia gesturing to the empty walls. Emerging artists, experimental voices. Charleston needs this. But you'll need grit, Maddie. Vision is nothing without execution. Her confidence was contagious. For the first time I could see it. Opening night, walls alive with art, the name Clark not tied to law firms or corporations but to creativity. But just as that vision began to take shape, reality struck. Carter called late one evening, his tone clipped. Your parents have filed a petition to contest the will. They claim your grandfather was not of sound mind. We'll need to prepare for a full legal battle. The words sank like lead. It wasn't just a dream anymore. It was a war. I looked around the apartment. Blueprints scattered on the table, sketches pinned to the wall, the faint smell of fresh paint drifting up from the gallery below. For the first time I realized, this inheritance wasn't just a gift. It was a line in the sand. If I stepped forward, there was no going back. I closed my notebook and whispered to myself, steady this time. Then let the fight begin. The courthouse smelled of varnished wood and cold marble. Sunlight streamed through high windows, illuminating rows of polished benches where Charleston's elite had gathered to watch the Clark family implode. At the front sat my parents, Richard and Margaret, their lawyers fanned out around them like vultures in tailored suits. Charlotte, flawless as ever, kept her chin high, but her fingers drummed nervously against the table. Across the aisle, Jonathan sat stiff, eyes unreadable. Me. I sat beside Mr. Carter, clutching Grandpa's letter in my lap like a lifeline. My heart hammered against my ribs. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair and a gaze sharp as steel, struck her gavel. This court will hear arguments regarding the validity of Thomas Clark's will. Richard rose first, his voice booming. Your Honor, my father was 87 years old, weakened by strokes, confused in his final months. He was manipulated by Madison Clark, a granddaughter with no sense of responsibility, who preyed on his sentimentality to gain control of assets she could never manage. My mother leaned forward, voice syrupy but venomous. This so-called inheritance is an insult to our family's legacy. Madison is unfit. He was always the black sheep, the disappointment. My husband and I will not allow our name to be tarnished. The words burned. Every insult I had heard behind closed doors was now broadcast in a courtroom. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. I felt my face flush, shame threatening to pull me under. Then Carter stood. Calm. Measured. Dangerous. Your Honor, Thomas Clark anticipated these very accusations. For 5 years he meticulously documented his intentions. Every transfer, every signature, every purchase was legal and deliberate. And more than that, he left his words. Carter pressed a button on the laptop before him. The screen flickered to life. And there he was. Grandpa Thomas. Clear-eyed, steady, his voice strong despite his age. If you are watching this, he began, my children have likely tried to undo what I have done. Let me be plain. I was of sound mind. I chose Madison as the heir to my literary legacy because she represents the part of this family that values soul above profit. Richard, Margaret, Charlotte, you measure life in numbers. I measure it in meaning. And Madison is the true heir of that meaning. The courtroom went silent. My mother's face drained of color. My father's jaw clenched, fury flickering in his eyes. Charlotte's hands trembled, her composure slipping. Grandpa's voice continued, unwavering. This was not sentiment. It was conviction. I prepared the documents. I recorded this so there could be no doubt. Madison will have what I built and she will carry it forward. That is my will. That is my legacy. The video ended. The silence that followed was louder than any shout. The judge leaned forward, her expression unreadable but firm. The evidence is clear. The will stands. I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. Carter's hand brushed my arm, steadying me. Across the aisle my parents seethed, Charlotte's eyes glistening with unshed tears. For the first time the courtroom and the world saw what my grandfather had always seen. I wasn't the black sheep. I was the heir. The gallery lights glowed like stars against the Charleston night. Clark House of Letters, my grandfather's vision now my reality, stood alive for the very first time. Inside, the polished floors gleamed beneath rows of canvases, sculptures and rare books. Guests drifted through with glasses of champagne, murmuring admiration, their reflections dancing in the tall windows. I stood near the entrance, heart pounding, a mix of terror and exhilaration. This was it. Months of sleepless nights, of doubts, of fighting tooth and nail against my own family, all leading to this moment. My name, the Clark name, was finally attached to something that felt like mine. Julia leaned close, whispering, "Look at them, Maddie. They're here because of you. Your grandfather would be proud." I smiled faintly, my chest tight with gratitude. And then, like a chill through the warm air, I saw her. Charlotte. She stood in the doorway, framed by the golden glow, her posture perfect as always. But her face, usually confident, untouchable, carried a shadow I hadn't seen before. For a moment the room seemed to hush. I braced myself, expecting venom, another round of bitter words. She approached slowly, her heels clicking against the floor, until she stood only a breath away. "It's impressive," she said softly, her eyes scanning the room. "I didn't think you'd actually pull it off." I stiffened. "Funny, neither did you." Her lips twitched, almost a smile, almost a sneer. "Don't mistake this for approval. I still think it's unfair. I worked for the Empire, Maddie. You inherited dreams." I held her gaze steady this time. Dreams are what Grandpa believed in. For once, someone saw more than numbers. He saw me. Charlotte's expression flickered, her mask slipping. "You know," she whispered, "he told me once that I would carry the Clark name into the future. I built my whole life on that promise. And then he gave it to you." Her voice cracked, barely audible. "Do you have any idea what that feels like?" I swallowed hard. For the first time I saw not just arrogance but pain. The perfect heir undone. Yes, I said quietly. It feels like being told you'll never be enough. I lived that every single day. The silence between us was heavy, charged, almost unbearable. Finally, Charlotte looked around again, her eyes softer. It's beautiful, Maddie. I mean that. Even if it should have been mine. Before I could answer, she turned sharply, retreating into the crowd. Guests parted around her, whispers trailing in her wake. Julia touched my shoulder gently. You don't have to fix her tonight. Let her see what you've built. That's enough. I exhaled slowly, watching Charlotte disappear into the glow of the gallery. For the first time, I didn't feel smaller in her presence. Tonight, the Clark name wasn't hers to define. It was mine. A year later, I stood in the very center of Clark House of Letters, the gallery alive with voices and laughter. Our anniversary exhibition had just opened. 12 artists, each with stories as raw and vibrant as the canvases on the walls. Champagne glasses clinked, the scent of fresh paint lingered, and sunlight poured in through those tall windows my grandfather had once imagined filled with art. But tonight wasn't just about paintings or books. Tonight was about what came after. On the far wall hung a bronze plaque unveiled that morning. Clark Foundation, in memory of Thomas and Eleanor Clark, to nurture voices the world has not yet heard. It was my proudest achievement. With part of my inheritance, I had created a fund for young writers and artists. Kids who, like me, had been told their dreams weren't practical, who just needed one person to believe in them. As I moved through the crowd, I caught sight of Gerald, glass in hand, eyes moist. Your grandfather would have loved this, Maddie, he said softly. Not the wealth, not the prestige, but this. Seeing you give others the chance he gave you. I smiled, my chest swelling with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. For the first time I understood. The gift wasn't just the building or the millions. It was the belief that I could build something lasting, something meaningful. Later that night, long after the guests had left, I walked alone through the quiet gallery. Each painting glowed under its spotlight, each book's spine whispered from the shelves. And there, in my office, hung a photograph of Grandpa Thomas, standing in front of his first hardware store, decades before wealth and empires. His eyes were steady, proud, alive. I set my hand against the frame. Thank you, Grandpa. Not just for the money. For seeing me when no one else did. For teaching me that legacy isn't about balance sheets. It's about courage and truth and what we leave behind in others. I drew a long breath, the silence of the gallery wrapping around me like a promise. Because the truth was clear now. Wealth can vanish, companies can crumble, but the impact of believing in someone, of nurturing a dream, that outlives everything. And that was my inheritance.